a fiery, red-haired boy, a radio broadcaster, a social work professor, and even a bus driver during the civil rights movement. But above all else, he was proud to serve his country as an honor guard.
This is the outfit I was in when I was in the Army 61 years ago. It is the 3rd Infantry Regiment. It has no division. When I went to Germany, I was in the 4th Infantry Division. Here, you only had a regiment. I was stationed in Washington, D.C. I was in the 2nd Battalion, and the 2nd Battalion is a battalion that goes to the airport when the president leaves, meets him when he comes back. Dignitaries go out and come in, we meet them and all. And every Sunday, we paraded, and the parade was called Pass and Review. Somebody would come in as a dignitary, or somebody would retire from the military. In fact, the last parade I marched in was Chief of Staff General Ridgway.
Matthew Toohey was born on March 16, 1934 in Paterson, New Jersey. His mother and father worked in the silk mills, and he had one older sister. He was descended from Irish immigrants who came to America searching for freedom and opportunity.
It's a small town. It was about 14 miles from New York City, and I loved it. My wife and I, we loved it. The history of the town was it was a silk industry, and that's how my grandparents came over here from Ireland. People from Paterson, New Jersey in the 1800s went over to Ireland and asked many people, would you like to go to Paterson, New Jersey and work in the silk mills?
In 1953, Matt graduated from the Paterson Technical Vocational High School, originally wanting to be a carpenter. He was selected to be a class valedictorian. At this time, the Korean War had just ended. But because of the war, America still had left the draft in place. But instead of waiting around to be drafted, Matt decided to step up and volunteer.
I was just a 20-year-old man and had just graduated high school. And one of the reasons I went in was the draft was on. They were drafting quite heavily. And I had asked them, you could go down to the draft board and you could say, when will I leave? And they said, well, you'll be leaving. This was in July of 1954. And I went down to the draft board and I asked, I said, when will I be leaving? And they said, you will be leaving in December. Well, I lived in New Jersey, and December is a very, very cold month. I figured, do I really want to go in when it's really cold into basic training? So I says, I'd like to volunteer then. I'd like to, rather than wait to be drafted, I want to volunteer to go into the Army. And they said, okay. And I said, well, when's the next group leave? And they said, the day after tomorrow.
The day before he left for training, however, an event occurred that would change his life forever. Her name was Lucille, and soon he would see her as more than just the beautiful salesgirl he met at a passing glance. He started writing to her while in the Army, and she replied. The two of them got to know each other very well over pen and paper.
And my niece was just born, and I wanted to buy her something, so I went to the store with my mother to purchase a little baby gift, and the salesgirl happened to be my current wife. It's a moment in time where you, in history, where you stop and you say, I'll never forget it.
But the day after he met Lucille, he was to leave for basic training in New Jersey. He was assigned to the Fighting 69 Division for 8 weeks of training, then assigned to an additional 8 weeks after completion.
I had to have 16 weeks basic training. So when I had found that out, it was worth every week.
Life was tough there, as the sergeants were tough and forced their recruits to conform to strict Army standards, and training was difficult. Matthew became an Old Guard honor guard in the 3rd Infantry Regiment in Washington, D.C., the President's escort unit at just 20 years of age. The 3rd Infantry Regiment, also known as the Old Guard, has been serving America since 1784. It is the oldest active duty infantry in the Army, and is the official presidential escort and Army's official ceremonial unit, expected to protect the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. during national emergencies or civil disturbances.
Matt was selected to serve in the 2nd Battalion at Fort McNair, Washington, D.C. As an honor guard, he was expected to be neat and polished, his uniform in pristine condition. Everyone had to be precise and exactly in order, especially in parades.
This is the finger where you dipped it in a shoe shine, and you dipped it in a little bit of alcohol, and you had your belts and your cross belt, and you had your bayonet pack, and you had the beak of your hat, and you had your shoes, and you sat there for hours until the sergeant would come around and look, and you could see your face in your shoes. That's a 24/7 guard, no matter what the weather is, blizzard, anything, you marched. Well, a typical day in the honor guards is you'd get up at 5:30, 3 or 4 hours till lunchtime, about 1 o'clock, we would parade. Being in the honor guards, you had to be very, very careful that you didn't taint the name of the 3rd Infantry Regiment. Some of the tasks were to be well prepared, to constantly be ready, to be moved out at any time.
A typical day included getting up at 5 in the morning and dressing in fatigues, also known as khaki uniform. Meals were in mess halls, which is also where socializing took place, and all day he only had a couple of hours off.
They taught me discipline. The military taught me how to stick to something I didn't like and follow through. And many attributes like that, it just stayed with you. And when you leave the military, that never leaves you.
During the time Matthew served, Dwight D. Eisenhower was the President of the United States. He saw him a couple of times but never talked to him, as it was his job to guard, not to approach. It was an honor to serve him.
Matt was transferred to Germany. He was assigned to work at a headquarters company as a truck driver. It enhanced his cultural experience there, getting to drive to and see many different parts of Germany, which not too long ago had been under the harsh regime of the Nazis.
And one day it came up on a board that if you wanted to, you could transfer to maybe another outfit. So I said, well, this, just a young man, I think I'll do that. So I put in for transfer, and they transferred me to Germany. So they assigned me to a headquarters company, and I drove a truck in the Army. And I loved it because I was all over Germany. I drove all over and got to see places that I would never have seen before. When I was going to college, when I had the summers off, I would drive buses. And I learned how to drive big buses because I drove big trucks in the Army. I was in what they called the Cold War.
At this time, the era of political and military tension between Eastern and Western superpowers, nuclear threats, and the fight against world communism known as the Cold War was just getting started. Lasting approximately between 1945 and 1991, it originated when Nazi Germany was split between American and Soviet forces after World War II. The eastern half, soon to encompass most of Eastern Europe, was ruled by the USSR, a socialist Marxist-Leninist state ruled by the secret police and Communist Party, which were dictated overall by a supreme leader. These leaders included Nikita Khrushchev, Leonid Brezhnev, Yuri Andropov, Konstantin Chernenko, and Mikhail Gorbachev. Organizations such as the press, military, and the economy were all controlled by the Communist Party.
Behind the scenes, there was always a chance that a war could happen, a hot war. So we were always prepared for that. They always kept us, we used to have to go to the rifle range. And like I say, once you were in the infantry, you always constantly had to keep up with your marksmanship with the rifle. Even though you paraded around and things like that, you always had to keep in the forefront of your mind, I was trained to be a fighting soldier.
In contrast, the free, democratic, and capitalist United States of America stood in defiance. It hosted a number of political parties, free press, and independent organizations. America was led by a president with checks and balances in Congress and the Supreme Court. Its leaders during this time included Harry S. Truman, John F. Kennedy, Richard M. Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush.
These two countries were both fighting to become the top world superpower, which they did in a number of ways. Nuclear war was always a real possibility, so both sides attempted to keep improving and threatening each other with nuclear weapons. Propaganda also was campaigned around the world for both sides' benefit, and the major espionage undertakings during this time inspired stories and entertainment such as James Bond, Mission Impossible, and more recently, the Spielberg thriller Bridge of Spies. The two superpowers also competed to be the best and most advanced in technology, which took form in the space race. Russia and America competed to be first for many things, and ultimately wanted to be the first to put the man on the moon.
Other elements of the Cold War included the Berlin Wall, lasting from 1961 to 1989 and dividing East from West. The 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, where, through tense negotiations between President Kennedy and First Secretary Khrushchev, the Soviet Union promised to dismantle all nuclear weapons in Cuba, just 90 miles from American shores, if the U.S. promised not to invade Cuba again and to dismantle their nuclear weapons in Turkey and Italy.
Russia was arming Cuba, who is only 90 miles away from the Florida shore, our states. They were arming Cuba with missiles. And there was a missile ship coming towards the United States. And if they gave them to Cuba, Cuba would be 90 miles at that time away from our continent with nuclear missiles.
The Yugoslav Wars from 1991 to 2001, which included the siege of Sarajevo, the longest siege of a capital city in the history of modern warfare.
The Cold War officially ended on December 26, 1991, upon the dismantling of the Soviet Union. However, the tensions and rivalry from that era never fully went away, as one can see from today's modern politics, and some still hold fear of the Cold War becoming heated once again.
The person next to you is the one that could save your life. Or no matter what happens, you never leave anyone behind.
Matt served a total of 2 years of active duty and 6 years in the Army Reserves. Once he got back, he started to date the beautiful sales girl that had captivated him the day before he left for training, and the one whom he had kept in touch with through letters all this time. He proposed to her at a drive-in movie, nervous but excited. On April 13th, 2017, they will be celebrating 60 years of marriage. They have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 12 great-grandchildren.
I've been out of the Army now for 61 years, and I'm as proud today as I was then. If you love what you're doing, you'll never have to work a day in your life.
Using his GI Bill to go to college, Matt got a degree in social work from the University of Nebraska. He later took a job at the Azusa Pacific University, both teaching and co-founding the social work program. He retired in 1999 after being a professor of social work for a quarter of a century. Lucille, his wife, became a psychologist and worked in a psychology ward in a hospital for PTSD patients, and later worked in special education for younger children.
My positive words to myself, this too will pass. Otherwise it'll soon be over.
What is a veteran? A veteran, whether active duty, discharged, retired, or reserve, is someone who, at one point in his life, wrote a blank check made payable to the United States of America for an amount of up to and including his life.